Jen Barney, and this is the Toasty Meringue, a casual place for me to share recipes and practical business baking advice. Today I've designed 3 different Halloween-inspired cakes. I've designed these specifically so they have high visual impact, but they're also really easy to do. This is perfect for the at-home baker, but also important for the person who's working in a bakery who needs some fast ideas that their clients will love. And you know what? Today, all the recipes feature, of all things, Jolly Ranchers. We'll be using Jolly Ranchers to make a moon and a pumpkin. Now our pumpkin, we're using a mold that we found off Amazon. I'm lucky enough that I have a silicone mold that's going to be the perfect size to make a full moon to go around our cake. But if you have any ring molds at home or any cake pans at home that you line with parchment, you can do this application as well. We're looking for a circle that's about 7 inches around. The first step is to unwrap all of your Jolly Ranchers. I've assorted these so that I have the yellow, orange, and red ones. My end goal is to have an orange pumpkin and an orange moon. So all these colors together will make orange. Over low heat, I'm adding these to a pan. My goal here is to heat these really slowly. You don't want to heat them too much or they're going to start to brown and caramelize and we're going to lose our beautiful orange color. We've been waiting patiently for our Jolly Ranchers to slowly melt, and we finally come to that point. So if you can see here, at this point it's pretty liquid and melty, and it's the perfect temperature for us to pour into our molds. I really don't want this to be that thick, so I will carefully go in and push this around. And before it sets up too much, with there you are, a paintbrush, I have some gold dust. This is a really cool step, certainly can be skipped if you do not have edible dust at home. But I like to set it in, or I like to sprinkle it before it fully sets up, because it's kind of cool to watch it like swirl around. And here I'm kind of swirling it myself a little bit to kind of get it started, especially after I tap it a little bit. It'll fall into place more and kind of ooze into itself. Now, while my sugar is still able to pour, I've got a little bit left in here. I do have this pumpkin mold. It's pretty straightforward. I do put a rubber band around it just to hold it in place. Not that it really needs it, it's more just a security measure to make sure I don't lose any of this liquid that's going to pour in here. One of the best things about working with Jolly Ranchers is that your whole house will smell like a Jolly Rancher, which is definitely a bonus. Now here comes the hard part, because you just have to wait and let it cool down, which could take probably up to 15 to 20 minutes. I'll let you know here in a second. Before my Jolly Ranchers fully set in this moon mold, I did take a scissors and a small sharp tool, and I cut out a doorway of sorts. Now this is where the cake will end up being, so I thought, why waste all that Jolly Rancher, because it's just going to get in the way anyway. So you can look here, when it's fully cooled, you'll be able to see that it looks like there's a door in the moon. Now we need to make our black Jolly Ranchers. These will end up looking like gems in the end. I am going to use the same bowl that I did the orange in, because we have to tint it black anyway. So why would I clean the bowl if I don't have to? And I'm melting this slowly just like before, and I'm also adding black food coloring to this. My black Jolly Ranchers are officially fully melted. I have a piece of parchment here. It's an old piece of parchment that's been lingering in the drawer for a while. I'm just pouring it out, letting it fully cool. Once this fully cools, we'll take a rolling pin and hit it really hard, and it'll crunch up and look like little crystals. The recipe I'm sharing with you today is a chocolate glaze. This is very similar to a ganache, except we're substituting part of the heavy cream with butter to make it a little more viscous, and I've added honey. And for Halloween, I'm adding a little bit of black food coloring in here so it looks really mysterious and dark. You can check out the recipe below to get the specifics, but it comes together really quick. All you have to do is take your heavy cream, heat it up, and I'm also adding my stick of Organic Valley butter. I'm letting that melt all the way through. I'm also adding the honey to this pot as well. I'm heating them until they just come to a boil. A fast tip while we're waiting for this butter to melt, I always use unsalted butter. I do this because I like to be in charge of the salt content, not the butter company who's putting salt into their butter. As a baker, this is a really important step, especially when you're making things like frostings, because you don't want them to be too salty. All right, at this point, my butter, cream, and honey have all melted together, and I simply add my Callebaut dark chocolate. Leave this on the pan for another minute just so that the cream will stay heated enough to melt through all the chocolate. But I'll pull this here really fast. Now it's time for me to add my black food coloring. A gel color or black powder is appropriate. I'm using powder today. In front of me I have a prepared cake that's covered in ganache and it has pretty straight edges. It's the perfect canvas for me to use my butter glaze on. Now, two things about this cake that are important. It's pretty cold at this point, it just came from the refrigerator. And it is important to have straight edges because you really want straight edges for all of that glaze to drip down perfectly. This glaze is pretty hot, it just came from the oven. And as I'm glazing this, I am paying attention to make sure that I get all of the sides. Once it goes on, I give it a tap, and I also swipe it, because you'd be surprised how much goes on that top that you don't realize that you want to get off. And I'll let this sit for a couple minutes just so it sets up. This cake will end up being our creepy, spooky moon cake. To it, I have edible gold luster dust. This one happens to have more of a bronze tint to it. You can get edible dust pretty much in any shade nowadays. I've added just a tiny little bit of alcohol to it. If you don't have alcohol, you can use water or lemon juice. Anything that has a higher acid content or that will evaporate quickly is what we're looking for. And I'm flicking it with a paintbrush. At home, if you don't have anything like this, white food coloring would look adorable and very appropriate for Halloween. My next step is to clean up all this flecks of gold around my table, and then I have to cut out a black cat in edible ink and edible sugar paper. I've cut out a black cat template, and I'll trace along the outline with an edible marker and edible sugar paper. I took the scissors and I cut out the cat and I drew on it with the edible marker. Pretty simple stuff here. I'll set this aside, we'll need it here in a minute. It looks as though our moon is fully ready to come out of the mold. It's everything that I need it to be, and the idea here is that we'll put it on top of this cake. I just took a visual of where my moon will be inserted, and I'm giving my moon space to go into the cake by cutting out a small little wedge here. I just want to give it a little bit of space so it doesn't have to cut through so much cake here. I'm intentionally not going all the way down to the board because I don't think my moon will push down that far. Okay, here's the moment of truth. I'm just gently, gently, gently pushing this down. There we are. What's left for me to do is simply just adhere our black cat to the surface using piping gel, and I'll clean up the edges. And I might add some sprinkles to hide up a few spots if I feel like it's necessary. I'll show you it in a second here when it's all said and done. Here we have our spooky moon black cake with our Jolly Rancher moon and our creepy black cat. Up next we have our fault line cake with our Jolly Rancher pumpkin topper. The first step here is to crunch up our black Jolly Ranchers. It's pretty basic. So we have our grape flavored Jolly Ranchers that we cooked earlier, and we added some black food coloring to it. Now here in a double bag, I'll take a rolling pin and hit it really hard, lots of times, until it crunches up. It's a really fun process, fun to do with a bunch of kids around. Now when this is all done, it'll look like black rock. It's really actually quite beautiful. And we'll be using this as a tool to make our cake look really organic and kind of awesome. Now the next step here is to take our buttercream and to put a row of frosting down. This frosting, the only purpose of it is to adhere our crunch, our beautiful black crunch layer to it. I will put gloves on for this step because I don't want my fingers to get all full of black Jolly Rancher here. I know I said it before, but the smell of these Jolly Ranchers is such a happy smell. And it's so much fun because you see this black rock and you think, oh, it's boring black rock. And then you can smell that intense grape flavor. It's kind of a fun experience. Our next step here is to frost the cake. I have this dark gray frosting. And the trick with these fault line cakes is to intentionally over frost an edge here. It should not look perfect. And then we'll go back through and scrape this out. And it'll look kind of groovy when it's all said and done. When you make these types of cakes, you really do need to build up the frosting that's on either side of this fault line. Because as you scrape, the hope is that you won't hit any of these rocks. It's what gives it a nice polished look to be able to have a somewhat clean scrape. But also you don't want it to look so perfect because this should look natural. Now, we clean up our top edge. The person who taught me how to do cakes called it landing the plane. She told me this. You take your airplane, it's coming in, and you land the plane. And that's what creates that nice edge. Because cakes do not naturally have that beautiful clean edge that is made from a cake decorator landing the plane. Okay, I think that's as far as I'm going to take it. My next step here is just to take a clean rag and clean up my edge, and I need to pop this pumpkin out of the mold. Now for the fun part, we get to unmold our pumpkin. Dun da da da! I would say that is a success. Now to finish this cake, I would like to add a little bit of gold. So I have our edible gold here, and I'm going through and just highlighting some of this edge here. I really don't want this to look perfect. I just am looking for a way to highlight that edge to give it a little more dramatic effect. And I don't know, maybe I'm going to take it too far. It's always hard to know when to stop. But I think I'm going to add some gold to this pumpkin too. And maybe a couple flecks of gold too here and there. Because I can't help myself. Center you just a little bit more. Yeah, this adds a little bit of class to it. Sometimes you don't know what you're doing until like you start, and then you just kind of make up your mind, and then you go with it, and you can't turn back once you get started. Now it's time for me to wash this gold off my fingers, and I'll present the cake to you. All right, everybody, here's our Halloween fault line cake with our Jolly Rancher pumpkin topper. Next, we're going to do our extravagant drip cake. Now, before we started, I did glaze this in our chocolate glaze, but it was totally unnecessary because I changed my mind, and now I want to do a striped side because I'd like to show you that technique. So we are going to cover this cake in green frosting and scrape it. Now, this doesn't have to go on perfect because half of it's going to get scraped off anyway. One of the beauties about a drip cake is that you hide so much of the frosting that if it's not perfect, nobody will ever know. Now I have this cake scraper that has this specific edge that'll give me a nice clean line as I scrape, which is what I'm looking for. Now the next step here is important because this needs to chill fully in order for me to be able to scrape it later on. So you will see that I'm going to put this back into the fridge and we will circle back to it at the end. Now earlier we set the grooves with this green frosting, and now I'm very just quickly going in and piping purple lines here. And then after this is done, I will scrape the two, and if I'm lucky, it'll look halfway decent. Now for our drip. This is one I found at Walmart from Wilton Cake Decorating. Doing a drip cake is always just a little bit nerve-wracking because you never quite know how it's going to turn out until it's done. I'm encouraging the drip by putting a little bit extra in the spots that need it, and I think that looks pretty darn good. Now with these drip cakes, I like to put a lot of sprinkles on, so I do have some really fun things prepared right now. And to this, I think I'm just going to start having fun here. So I'm talking eyeballs, tons of sprinkles at the bottom, of different kinds of sprinkles. And I'm going for it. I'm all in. I'm going to get some of these sprinkles out of the way so it's not dangerous on the floor here at the bakery. I have a piping bag with a rose tip on it, and we will be piping in ribbons on the top. It's kind of a fun look. Looks like a party. Now that all my sprinkles are in order, my piece de resistance are these little crunched up green apple Jelly Rancher candies that add a little bit of sparkle on the top. Here you have it, my wonky-eyed Halloween drip cake. Hey, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me talk about the 3 cakes that I put on for you today. You know, it's a lot of fun for me to take a step back from the bakery, to be a little bit creative, and to share with you some really great ideas of cake decorating that you can do with your family, and some very practical ways to do fast decorating for a bakery setting. Thank you so much. This is Jen Barney with the Toasty Meringue.